It has been quite a long time since I've actually read from the book of Isaiah, being sick, but be that as it may, we're at chapter 17, verse 12. I believe that's where we left off, and I thank you for joining me. Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. Notes. Now the prophecy, although continuing, no longer refers to Israel's present problems, but to a later time. Actually, verses 12 through 14 refer to the coming tribulation, the rise of the Antichrist, and the battle of Armageddon. Verse 13, the nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee afar off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. And behold, an evening tide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them who spoil us, and the lot of them who rob us. Notes. Well, this pictures the gathering of many nations against Israel at the Battle of Armageddon. And I mean, you can see that happening on the news every single day. It will be at that time when God will rebuke them and fight for Israel. Ezekiel chapters 38 through 39, Joel chapter 3, but particularly Joel chapter 3 verse 2, Zechariah 14, and Revelation chapter 19. I mean, you can see these things happening every single day. As a matter of fact, our chucklehead of a president is trying to force Israel to give up land right now. Not very smart, Mr. Obama. I hope you don't get elected. Anyways, chapter 18, or re-elected, I should say. Chapter 18. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Notes. Now the word woe is used here for judgment. The prophecy given here regarding Ethiopia does not concern Israel's present judgments during the time of Isaiah, but rather the latter days, as in verses 12 through 14 of the previous chapter. Verse 2, who sends ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushers upon the waters, saying, Go, you swift messengers, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. Notes. Now, some scholars contend that the entirety of verse 2 refers to Ethiopia. While that may actually be true, still the language expressed does not seem to fit Ethiopia, but rather Israel. Verse 3, all you inhabitants of the world and dwellers of the earth, see you, when he lifts up an ensign on the mountains, and when he blows a trumpet, hear ye. Notes. The entirety of the world is called to attention regarding that which the Lord will do at the Battle of Armageddon. The pronoun he refers to Jehovah. The ensign that he will lift up is the Messiah. It seems that the Lord himself will blow a trumpet at the second coming of Christ. Joel chapter 2 verse 1, Zechariah 9 chapter 9 verse 14, and even 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 36. At least that's what I kind of get out of that. Verse 4. For the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place, like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Notes. The action of the Messiah during the entire period of Israel's rejection and up to the time of verse 7, it is declared in verses 4 through 6, if you'll just pay attention. Now his silence concerning Israel during this time, which now is about 2,000 years with some change, it is predicted in this verse. In effect, he says, I will be inactive. Yet will I keep looking for my dwelling place. I will be to them like sunshine after rain, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. He is saying that he will neither cease to love nor lose sight of his ancient people. Like I have personally said in many of my teachings, that he's not going to drag Israel kicking and screaming just to leave them inches away from the finish line. He's going to do what he needs to do with his people. Verse 5. For afore the harvest, when the bud is perfect, and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks, and take away and cut down the branches. Notes. Now he is God, and he is the divine vine dresser, the Messiah, if you will. His instrument will be the Antichrist. I mean, he's really going to allow the Antichrist to pluck some feathers off of Israel, if you know what I mean. It's not because he doesn't love his people. It's because this is what it's going to have to take to get their attention. I've said it before, God is going to have to allow for Israel to get backed up into such a tight corner that they're going to lift up their heads and say, you know what, God, if you don't do something now, right now, it's going to be over. That just shows you just how stiff-necked the people of Exodus really were. Verse 6. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains, and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer upon them, and all the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them. Notes. If Israel's faithful Redeemer likens his people to a vine, so does he liken their enemies to ravenous vultures and wild beasts. You can also find something very similar in Psalms chapter 1, verse 4. Verse 7. In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of the hosts, of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden under foot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion. Notes. Now in that time refers to the Antichrist armies, which will be destroyed in the Battle of Armageddon. Then the millennium will actually begin. Israel at that time will offer herself as a present to the Messiah. And at that same time, the Gentile nations will offer herself as a present to him. Well, the gifts will be made upon Mount Zion. That's what it's saying. Chapter 19, and we're going to predict the fall of the Egyptians. The burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt. And the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. Notes. Now this verse mentions the idols of Egypt, and Egypt has always been symbolic of the world. The deliverance of the children of Israel out of Egypt symbolizes the born-again experience, as well as victory over Satan concerning the child of God, and Moses, of course, being a typology of Christ. This speaks of the second coming, when Egypt will eventually accept the Lord. It's going to be a beautiful time, but there's going to be trouble before that. Verse 2. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight every one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, the kingdom against kingdom. Notes. When this civil war in Egypt will take place in connection with these last day events is not stated, but it's very clear that at Armageddon men will be so confused that they will turn on each other. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 13 through 14. It's very interesting if you look at the civil disposition of Egypt right now. I mean, there are riots all the time off over there right now. So they're pretty much doing exactly what this is saying right now on the news. Verse 3. And the spirit of Egypt shall fall in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof. And they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them who have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. Notes. Now Egypt except for that short time under Joseph, found in Genesis 41, has always been ruled, at least indirectly, by some kind of evil spirit of some kind. At the time of the Antichrist, they will consult all of these things, but it will be empty nothings. How stupid it is for them to bow to the ancient gods that failed to protect Egypt, expecting different results. But it's going to be a time of such desperation that, well, maybe talking to a dead, deceased statue that hadn't done anything might actually make sense. Actually, it can't be deceased because it never lived. But anyways, duh. Verse 4. And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. Notes. This passage tells us that quite possibly the Lord will allow Egypt to be defeated by the Antichrist. This will probably happen at approximately the outset of the Great Tribulation. I'm pretty sure that this fierce king is the Antichrist. Verse 5. I gotta check the time here. Verse 5. And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. Notes. Now, the sea referred to here is probably the Nile. The rivers wasted and dried up refer to, no doubt, to a phenomenon of nature brought about by the Lord, which will take place during the time of the Great Tribulation, beginning possibly with the invasion of the Antichrist. You can check your translations and look into this, but really didn't get a whole lot out of it. Verse 6. And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up, and reeds and flags shall wither. The paper reeds by the brooks, and by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. Notes. We're going to have some crop failure during the time of the Great Tribulation, which will last for some 7 years. The Lord himself will disturb the planetary bodies, causing tremendous disturbances on the earth. And Egypt will probably be greatly affected by all of this. Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 through 17. Verse 8. The fishers also shall mourn, and all they who cast angle into the brook shall lament, and they who spread nets upon the waters shall languish. Moreover, they who work in fine flax, and they who weave network shall also be confounded. And they shall be broken in the purposes thereof, all who make sluices and ponds for fish. Notes. These verses merely reflect the fact of industries being brought to a standstill during the time of the Great Tribulation. I mean, obviously, Egypt is surrounded by water, and if you don't have a whole lot of fish, your fishing industry is going to fail. And the making of such things and building ponds and causing streams, well, there's going to be some disturbances. Industry is going to come to a screeching halt. Verse 11. Surely the princes of Zoan are fools. The counsels of the wise counselors of Pharaoh is become brutish. How say ye unto Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, the son of ancient kings. Notes. Now the princes of verses 11 through 13 refer to the priests' princes. They were a travesty of God's kings and priests. They claimed superhuman knowledge and royal descent. How stupid. Verse 12. Where are they? Where are your wise men? And let them tell you now, and let them know that the Lord of hosts has purposed upon Egypt. Notes. Now this is a tremendous challenge right here. The prophets of Jehovah addressed it more than once to the prophets of idolatry, for only God can foresee what surely will happen. I mean, look at Elijah and those Baal worshippers out there. They got to screaming and hooting and hollering and dancing around and cutting each other. But their God must have been sitting on the toilet, because the God of the Bible, he answered. Verse 13. The princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph are deceived. They have also seduced Egypt, even they who are the stay of the tribes thereof. Notes. Zoan was the seat of the Egyptian court. It was there that Moses announced the 10 plagues. Once again, God calls the leaders of Egypt, he calls them deceived fools. They are deceived because they listen to these counselors who receive their information from demon spirits. Talk to the statue and let the devil take advantage of you, huh? Verse 14. The Lord has mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. Notes. Now, that's rather up forward with that. While the leaders of Egypt will not simply understand it, still, the cause of their problems has been evil spirits. It is the same presently in many nations of the world. I mean, God got so sick and tired of it that he just pretty much allowed the ancient Egyptian culture to just wither away and die. That's because he just got so sick and tired of it. Verse 15. Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail, branch or rush may do. Notes. Now, in ancient times, Egypt was supposed to be the center of knowledge. There will be no wisdom in the coming day of the Great Tribulation. There will be nothing but confusion. How ironic it actually is, though. Because, I mean, the ancient culture of Egypt, you cannot help but be amazed at their accomplishments. I mean, they built these huge ships. They built these pyramids that are so accurate mathematically that you cannot stick a credit card between those bricks. And they weigh hundreds of tons, not hundreds of tons, but hundreds of pounds in some cases. I mean, that's a level of accuracy that is just unbelievable. Not to mention that their pyramids match the constellation Orion. And, I mean, you could just go on forever and ever about Egypt and how smart these people were. I personally believe that they invented batteries and had lights. If you should go and check out the book Chariot of the Gods, and you'll see what I mean. Verse 16. In that day shall Egypt be like unto woman, and it shall be afraid and fear because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he shakes over it. Notes. Now this verse is the portrayal of wrath and judgment that shall come in that day. It pertains basically to the Battle of Armageddon, which will cause Egypt much more trouble than normal due to the fact that the Lord of hosts will express a particular anger towards it because of Egypt's perverseness towards Israel. I mean, they have just been anti-Israel off and on. Verse 17. And the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Everyone who makes mention thereof shall be afraid in himself because of the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he has determined against it. Notes. Now, in the coming battle of Armageddon, Judah will have the counsel of the Lord of hosts, while Egypt will be trusting in demon spirits. Now, you can see from this that the outcome is going to be rather sad for Egypt. Verse 18. In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Lord of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction. Notes. Now the 5 great cities of ancient Egypt were originally cities of unrighteousness. Here they're going to be turned into cities of righteousness. Well, why is this going to be so? It's going to happen. This will be in the kingdom age after the second coming. Verse 19. In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof of the Lord. Notes. An altar and a pillar, not altars and pillars, a altar and a pillar, for there is only one way of redemption and one testimony. Obviously, this altar will be for men to offer sacrifices to God in the millennium, like the one to be used in Jerusalem for the same purposes during this period. Now, the pillar is to be used only as a sign and witness to commemorate an event, which of course speaks of Egypt's deliverance by the Lord from the Antichrist. He's going to let some fire and some hell get rained down on them, and it's going to cause them to turn around and repent. Verse 20. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior and a great one, and he shall deliver them. Notes. Now boy, ain't that some really good news right there. The Savior and the great one, well obviously this will be none other than Christ himself. Well obviously he is the only one that can deliver in this particular manner. Verse 21. And the Lord shall be known in Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Yes, they shall vow a vow unto the Lord and perform it. Notes. Now that's just amazing right there to me. This land that has been steeped in idol worship is going to turn around. Now the Lord of glory will cover Egypt, and they will gladly serve him. And upon this altar mentioned in verse 19, they will do sacrifices and oblations. This will be in the coming kingdom age, obviously, but man, what a prophecy. I can't wait to see that one fulfilled, because I'm a big fan of ancient Egypt, no matter how strange they were. Verse 22. And the Lord shall smite Egypt. He shall smite and heal it. And they shall return even to the Lord, and he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. Notes. Now before the healing can come, a smiting must come first. And unfortunately it shall. God's going to let the Antichrist kind of have his way with them for a while. And then he's going to show up. And Egypt's going to turn around. They're going to be like, hey, we want to worship this guy. He saved us. Verse 23. In that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. Notes. Now in that day refers to the millennium, and consequently the animosity and hatred and anger which have characterized this area of the world since the dawn of time, actually, have now finally been wrested away. And the land will then be ruled by the Lord of glory. The hatred is now gone. All those little countries off over there, I mean, Europe is filled with lands that have had, I mean, so many wars have happened off over there. I mean, they're just countless. And it's going to end, finally. Verse 24. In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land. Notes. Now these three nations which are mentioned here speak of Noah's 3 sons, which refer to the entire world and will become servants of Jehovah. Of course, I'm talking about Shem, Ham, and Japheth way back there in the book of Genesis. The human race consists of these 3 great families: Assyria, Israel, and Egypt. In effect, I'm talking about Shem, Ham, and Japheth, of course. Genesis chapter 9, if I'm not mistaken. These 3 countries, Israel, Egypt, and Assyria, which consist, Assyria's modern-day Iraq, instead of being a curse, they're now going to be a blessing. Verse 25. Whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. Notes. Now, this is really amazing to me. This tells us that the Arabs will ultimately come to Christ, thereby disavowing the religion of Islam. Actually, it will be no more, as well as all the other religions of the world. In that glad day, there will be one Savior, who is the world's Redeemer, who is the Lord Christ. I personally cannot wait for all that trouble to be gone. Chapter 20. In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod, and took it. At the same time spoke the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off of your loins, and put off your shoe from your foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Notes. Now this is kind of unusual. I got 2 verses to cover here. This prophecy, talking about verse 1, is different from the prophecy of the previous chapter, which is kind of obvious. I mean, we got some strange goings on right here. Its lesson for Israel was the bitter fruit that the servants of God must taste when the arm of flesh is leaned upon, and not the arm of God. Now for verse 2, God was the speaker and Isaiah was his instrument. Well, the prophet was not naked as we think of such, simply laying aside his peculiar prophetic garments. I mean, he had, I guess you could say he had kind of a wardrobe, if you will. Verse 3. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia. Notes. Now the 3 years mentioned here probably refer to the same number mentioned in chapter 16, verse 14. Within 3 years, Moab, Egypt, and Ethiopia were to be destroyed, and they were. Verse 4. So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. Now, notes. Now we're talking about humiliation here. Such was meant the object lesson of Isaiah of verse 2 to portray. So complete and abject would be the enslavement of the Egyptian warriors that they would not even be given loincloths to wrap around their naked bodies. Now such shows utter defeat and humiliation. I mean, it's an embarrassment. Verse 5. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory. Notes. Now the prophet, he is telling Judah not to look to Ethiopia or Egypt for help, because none would be forthcoming from these sectors due to the fact that they themselves are going to get totally wiped up. I mean, they're going to get defeated so badly that they're not going to have any clothing. They're not going to have even cloth for armor. They're not going to have any weapons. They're not going to have anything. Verse 6. And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? Notes. Now Judah is asking the question, how shall we escape? If they cannot get help from Ethiopia and Egypt, what can they possibly do? They would learn that their escape was the Lord of hosts. He sent an angel who killed 185,000 Assyrians and caused the others to flee. Just a very few people were left in that event. It's found in Isaiah chapter 37, verses 36 through 38. God says what he means, and he means what he says. With that being said, we will have to pick up in chapter 21, and we're going to talk about the fall of Babylon and the Medo-Persian spoiler, if you will. Thank you, and God bless. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.